You can never go into a meeting with stakeholders with too much data, but there are painful circumstances that arise if you go in with too little. You can only say so many times, I don't know the answer to that, but I'll get it for you.
Don't conduct your analysis in isolation because data is so incredibly powerful.
Not defending just the tribe, but defending the organization.
Those creative people that you really want to keep empowered, keep excited, keep motivated, keep thinking.
A good experience pays dividends down the line.
Stereotypes tend to break down in proximity.
Welcome to We're Only Human, a podcast about human resources, business, technology, and the workplace. My name is Ben Eubanks, your host, and I'm so glad you're here. Hey everyone, it's Ben Eubanks. I'm so glad you're here with us today, and I recently had the chance, the privilege, and the pleasure to go to Cork, Ireland for the Starcircle Supernova Conference. And while I was there, I had a chance to meet with and engage with so many great, incredible HR and talent leaders like the ones you're about to hear in this conversation. So I spoke with Marcus Thorpe from ThoughtWorks. We talked about some of the things that he had done in his time at the company there, helping them grow, helping them expand their TA function across the globe. And it's a really incredible conversation that touches on how to use data and establish your credibility, how to grow and set your team up for success if you're trying to centralize your talent acquisition function. So we'll get into some of those big details there, as well as Marcus is just super sharp. You can tell that immediately. So excited to hear from Marcus here. We have another episode with Larry Kelly coming along in the queue here for the podcast, but I know you'll enjoy this conversation with Marcus. Here we go. Hey everyone, welcome to We're Only Human. I'm so glad you're here with us. I am here in Cork, Ireland with Marcus from ThoughtWorks, and we're going to be talking about some of the key things that he's thinking about these days around creating alignment with TA functions in the business, how to centralize your recruiting function, all those kinds of things. Marcus, welcome. Glad to have you.
Thank you very much. Good to be here.
So before we get into our conversation, would you take a minute and tell the audience more about who you are and what you do, please?
Sure. My name is Marcus Thorpe. I'm global head of TA where I've been for about 7 years now. So I'm based remotely just south of Manchester in the UK. And my background encompasses working for lots of big tech product companies that you've probably heard of, like Google and Amazon and Twitter, basically running large or larger parts of their TA organization and building for scale, essentially trying to put pieces in place that allow for scale to happen on a global repertoire.
So why does building appeal to you so much as a TA leader?
My brain works best when it's applied to problems. And when you've got to the point that you're happy to put your feet up on the desk to a certain extent, you're not really solving any problems anymore, apart from when can I have my lunch? But I like to sit down with smart TA leaders and business leaders and put problems on the table and then come up with creative option one or option two to try and solve it. And that's always been appealing to me and continues to be. And so companies tend to keep me around when the problems continue to scale. And I tend to put my hand up and say, might be time for something else when those feet arrive on the desk.
How long at ThoughtWorks now?
7 years. July something was my 7th anniversary, which is a record for me.
Okay.
Google was my record with just under 6 years. And because sometimes the building takes 6 months, 12 months, 2 years, and sometimes it takes longer.
Why does it take longer at ThoughtWorks? Is it the complexity of the organization, the global range of it?
Exactly. So when I joined, we were in 13 countries. We're now in 20. We've moved from country-led to centralized. The calibration, ostensibly we hired the same height. When we're talking to our clients, we hired the same caliber of individuals everywhere we went. But what was actually happening is that was by chance, not by design. So I had to basically build calibrated, replicable processes from the ground up, put teams in place, the scale of the hiring. When I joined, we made about 1,100 hires in 2017. And then our record year was 2022 when we made 4,500. So everything we're doing now, we've had a bit of a slowdown. Everything we're doing now is with the goal of getting to 5,000 plus hires in a year. And that to happen seamlessly across go-to-market, all the corporate roles, as well as everything in engineering. We're expanding into sort of new areas like data engineering, data science, infrastructure, etc. And then having to build processes for all of those as well.
So centralizing that, talk about some of the the value that comes from centralizing and some of the challenge that comes from that, because it's easy to read someone's recommendation. Oh, you should centralize your function. And it's not as simple as, oh, I'll just turn that dial over from making these decisions on a decentralized basis to centralized. And there's got to be a lot to that.
Yeah, it takes a lot of planning. It takes a lot of time. We were lucky in that even though I didn't have direct span of control over all of our country-led teams, we'd been getting together enough and we'd built enough of a sort of a
rapport,
credibility. Yeah. Exactly. And we built a vision together. Something I put in place early was building out a vision for talent acquisition, to look at all of the pain points and then to prioritize those. So we agreed as a sort of global organization. So when it actually came to pulling everyone together, we'd already been working together. We had one-on-ones, even though it wasn't performance related. And so for us, compared to some of the other functions, centralization was actually relatively straightforward. We had really good data. I was able to get an analyst early. And so we were able to trust the data our systems were providing. We drew a line in the sand and said, as of this date, we will never touch a spreadsheet again. It'll all be coming from our systems and our BI tool. And as a result, we were talking the same language. There was still some complexity. Some of the stakeholders would interact with the TA team in a country in a different way than another one. So we had to standardize a little bit of that. But it wasn't actually as painful as some of the other functions that ThoughtWorks had to deal with.
So did you have that analyst already when you had this vision for bringing it all together? Like, we have to have the data in one place to be able to make these decisions as a team more globally, that a lot of companies struggle with either borrowing a resource from elsewhere in the business or getting their own dedicated one to be able to do that.
Yeah, dedication was key. So we actually, which is a bit surprising for a tech company, but it's the first analyst we had at ThoughtWorks.
On the TA team?
Was on the TA team. Uh-huh. And he now runs an organization across talent, so the talent analytics organization, but still reports in. But that was about 5 years ago. So I was able to say, we need help. If we're going to do a job and we're going to be able to make the business cases that we need to grow, add to tech stack, etc., we're going to need to have data to formulate the conversations and to make the arguments with an engineering-centric audience. Yes, found somebody who's been brilliant, ex-recruiter by chance, so understood the mechanics of recruiting a little bit, has that really good balance between being able to talk to a tech audience as well as a sort of layman audience, and basically owns our systems from a data perspective. So anything that we want to do, he was able to build a data cube in Sisense, which is our BI tool, and extrapolate what we need. And then to help us with not just the data, but the insights too. It's no data without insights is something we came up with a while ago, which is you can have oodles of data, but unless you can actually spot the outliers relatively quickly and have some supposition for why the data is telling us X or Y, it's not really worth very much.
No, you could spend all day just pouring through it. And that's one of the problems that a lot of analysts that don't have that TA background, they don't know when something is like interesting, but not worth investing a lot of time in versus that's something we need to dig into because that's flagging a future problem or something else. So I love that they have that background to draw on and to make it more relevant.
Yeah, I wouldn't have necessarily looked for it, but it's been so worthwhile. And the best part of it is the fact that we're able to have a conversation, a weekly one-on-one with him, and some idea has popped up that week, and I'll say, something to noodle over, not urgent, but would like to see this sort of in some sort of
visualization or something,
visualization. And he's able to go away, think about it, fit it into his BAU work, etc. And then 3 weeks later, we'll come back and say, what do you think about this? Or what do you think about that? And it tends to be brilliant and does the job exactly. And then we can pass on to a stakeholder, and then my boss is happy and the stakeholders are happy, and they are seen as this sort of amazing data-centric organization.
So if you were speaking to some of our friends in the TA world out there, you're going to get a chance to probably at the conference, but if you're chatting with them and saying, hey, here's 2 or 3 pieces of advice that I'd give you, or even like my number one, you have to do this or it's not going to work out in the end. What sort of advice would you give?
Probably 2 bits. One is calibration. You need to get the whole fail or succeed is at scale. If you don't make objective decisions, you either burn through interviewers. We have a big problem with interview availability. We're a consultancy, so we hire people, they go and work with clients, and they forget about HQ. They're using client systems, client tools, etc. Don't necessarily check their Gmail and so on. So it's a constant battle to get enough interviewers. So the last thing we need to do is burn through those with wasted interviews, essentially. So we have good candidates, and they can't agree on what good looks like. So building attribute-based interviewing, some sort of Venn diagram, so there's some intersection is key, but primary focus for each individual interviewer is understood in advance. They have experience of it. They have a question bank they can use if they want to. They'll always see other areas that potentially could be yellow flags or red flags for someone later in the process. But that calibration is key, and that's particularly growing at scale, making sure that everybody's singing to the same hymn book, understands what good looks like, is able to question, and then not to bias each other during the process. You debrief at the end with zero knowledge. Maybe the last person will feed them some yellow flags and red flags to probe deeper, but otherwise the feedback is all blind until you get to the debrief at the end, and then you make a decision. And if you can't make a decision, the decision is always no, but that calibration is utterly critical. Otherwise scale can't happen. And you either burn through candidates, annoy candidates by wasting their time, because a good candidate will know when they've had a positive interview experience and say, yes, I think I've got that, walk out sort of the fist pump. And if you then can't follow that up with an offer, that news will spread quickly that we're not able to make decisions well, and we end up getting a reputation as being a bad employer, and trouble ensues. The other critical element is the data. It's living in the engineering world with logical, data-centric mindsets to deal with as stakeholders. You need to have data to argue any business direction. My argument is you can never go into a meeting with stakeholders with too much data, but there are painful circumstances that arise if you go in with too little. You can only say so many times, I don't know the answer to that, but I'll get it for you. Much better to go in with all of it in your back pocket, print it out on your phone, wherever it is, and be able to project it quite quickly to demonstrate, actually, your theory is this is happening, but realistically, this is the data is telling us this is happening.
Yes.
And you need to change direction because of that. And it's an extremely powerful tool. And if you don't have the data and the analysis or the insights into the data, you end up finding yourself digging yourself out of a hole, because the engineering mindset will always be able to probably plow through data quicker than you can and come up with wrong contextual theories. And you need to have the conviction and the confidence to disprove them and say, actually, no, and pull another piece of data if necessary to disprove their theory. But without data, I believe our job's impossible.
Data is my love language, so I'm enjoying it. Every time you say that, I'm getting a little shiver over here and loving that. So a comment on that one. One of the things that we found in our research that was surprising to me is even the way that we have people looking at data, and you brought it up just now, so I'm saying it, even the way we have people look at data, when you present it, their own bias can affect how they see it, even though it's the same. You look at it, I look at it. And so if you're looking at an employee survey as an example, and they've got a manager that treats them poorly, they're looking for that every time, saying, see, there it is. I knew it was there, because that's what they experience. And so if they're like, hey, that one time that the team was recruiting, it took them an extra long time. And look, the data says it's taking too long to do that. And you say, hey, listen, that's actually 25% faster than it was last quarter. We're actually reducing it, but it just seems long to them because they've tied to experience. On the calibration piece, I want to ask you a question. You and I both know that, bless them, every single hiring leader we have thinks that their way is the best way. And so how do you get them to agree on a middle ground? Because usually when you're trying to calibrate, you're going to give a little, they're going to give a little, we're going to find what good looks like because we can't all agree on one single exact thing. Any advice for someone who's trying to get those leaders on the same page in that way?
We're fortunate to an extent in that we don't hire for hiring managers for the majority. We hire first across the line. We have a number of heads, but they don't all have individual direct managers, performance managers, etc. So we're hiring for the company predominantly rather than for individuals. But for the areas that we do, corporate roles, go-to-market roles, etc., they have hiring managers. Yes. And go-to-market are probably the most complicated. They're salespeople. They believe they have all the skills of persuasion in the world. They know best, and can quite often take a lot more arm twisting. The data isn't necessarily as powerful for them because they're not engineering centric and they're not based in median versus mean, etc., which is something I learned the painful way from an engineering audience. Always go for median over mean because that's the piece of information that they want to see. But for go-to-market, it's a lot more ego-driven first impressions. You have to get them over their biases a lot quicker, a lot more straight. But basically what it comes down to is you have to get a group of people hopefully not just the hiring manager, but a group of their subordinates or peers in a room, and you have to agree. You have to basically workshop what are the key attributes, what are the must-haves, should-haves, nice-to-haves. It sounds easy to say, but you start with a very long list.
And there's a lot of arguing probably and discussing, we'll call it. Yeah.
But ultimately, your goal as a TA leader is to remove as many from the first column of must-haves as possible. So you get to the absolute crux of what's required. And then the other stuff that you have are sort of nice bits of polish that you'll see from the CV that'll perhaps, when you're trying to build the credibility, and hopefully at the point, you get to a point where you're trusted just to bring candidates into interview. You don't need to get approval. So yes, I want to speak to this person every time. But in order to get there, you need to make sure that the must-haves are clearly defined and that you are able to measure them correctly. You can even agree on what questions make sense and what don't. It's a really good idea from time to give feedback on feedback. So you've got feedback. Hopefully it's well-written feedback. Places like Google, they'll literally transcribe the interview pretty much and then add a qualification to it. Most companies don't have the time and energy to do that. So it's trying to get as much out of the data as you can, or force them to write more if necessary. But then giving feedback on feedback is important because there are questions which perhaps don't make much sense, or their interpretation of the answer may not be a good one. And the agreement around the room is that actually that was quite a good answer. And if you add it to the question asked by Bob over there 2 weeks later, we actually have a much more positive view of the candidate than we did initially from that sort of poorly worded answer that was received when perhaps they were nervous and first to go. It's about alignment and then holding them accountable. It's not uncommon that I have to remind the business that we don't run recruitment. We run a process on behalf of the business. We will administer it. We will be accountable for the metrics that we promised to that process, but ultimately it's your process to decide who's going to join you and sit next to you. And we'll add elements to it like cultural alignment and pieces that are important to the company, maybe not to you personally, but ultimately we are facilitating your process. So it's critical for us to get your process right, and then we're able to run it with as few hiccups as possible.
That's tremendous. Okay, so if someone wants to connect with you on LinkedIn, wants to follow you and see all of your good insights you're going to share, things like that, you go with them, connect me on LinkedIn? Is that fine?
Absolutely. Yeah, happy to.
Thank you so much for joining me on the show today. I'm honored to have you as a listener. If you enjoyed this episode, please take 10 seconds to rate it at iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to your podcast. Also, if you know a friend that could benefit from today's conversation, please pass it their way. After all, a rising tide lifts all ships. To see show notes, sponsor information, and our full show archives, visit onlyhumanshow.com.